Welcome in this second video of this series of my 10 favorite Asian films. In the first video I had a talk about the 10 Hong Kong films I loved and I enjoyed the most. And so in this video I'm going to do exactly the same exercise but with Japan. So to remind you quickly of the rules, while I've given an order from 10 to 1, this ranking doesn't mean much. It's just based on the feeling of the time, but it doesn't have much value. I could perfectly put number 8, number 9 at the number 1 or number 2 position, depending on my mood. It's just a way to organize things. So let's start on the number 10 I'm going to talk about is Tokyo Tribe, directed by Sono Sion. Sono Sion is actually a director I'm not so... it's a director I'm familiar with, but I'm not really an expert on. I'm far from having seen his whole filmography. And so far, what I've seen of him is quite uneven. There are some movies of him I really like. There are some movies of him I find awful. So I'm unable at this stage to really have a definitive opinion on Sono Sion. Is he a great director? Is he a hack? I don't know. But I will certainly keep pushing and watch as many, if not all, the film he has done, so I can have a final say about his work. But whatever the case, whatever the final say will be, there is one movie I really love, and it's Tokyo Tribe. Tokyo Tribe, it's a manga adaptation, as it is often the case for many Japanese films now for quite a few years. So what is Tokyo Tribe? It's basically just several gangs which are controlling Tokyo and which are fighting with each others. And you have one gang which is trying to mastermind the struggle and to manipulate the different entities so that it can take over Tokyo. So a very basic story there. There is really nothing special, but that's not a problem. What is important in Tokyo Tribe is the vibe, the mood. It's basically a musical with Japanese rap and hip hop. And I must say, as an introduction in a way, that I actually don't like rap and hip hop. I'm really not into this kind of musical style. But I think that really shows you how much Tokyo Tribe is great. That it was able to convince me, that it was able to win me over despite my dislike for this kind of music. And what I really enjoy in Tokyo Tribe is the energy. If you have watched the video I did about my favorite Hong Kong film, that's something which I talk about many times, which I repeated many times, that I love the energy of Hong Kong cinema. And there is a similar vibe, a similar feeling when I watched Tokyo Tribe. It was really full of energy. It was full of activity, and that's really something I enjoyed in the film. It's that the camera was always on the move. It was always moving very smoothly, and each time it was moving, there were also a lot of things happening in the background, a lot of people dancing, moving, doing whatever. He really managed to catch the spirit of each of these gangs, which are very specific visual identity and also a music which fits with their style. And so that created a universe which is very fun, which is very colorful, which is very animated, and which I found to be a lot of fun. Of course, you also have to add some fights. You also have some weird characters, especially in the bad guy side, with a lot of weirdo. Basically, you have a guy with like a Greek statue, always almost naked. You have Riki Takeshi, who is the big boss of the bad guy gang and who is in complete over-the-top mode, as he's able to do sometimes. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of energy. You also have a cameo. No, not exactly. You also have a supporting part from Yoshihiro Takayama, who is known under the nickname of the Hotness, and who was one of the who is responsible for one of the most memorable fights in Pride in the early 2000s, a fight against Don Fry. If you haven't watched Yoshihiro Takayama versus Don Fry, I invite you to check it. It's easily accessible on YouTube, and it's insane. Don Fry, who is also in a few Japanese films, is in Godzilla Final Wars. But anyway, I'm moving in another direction there. But anyway, it's nice to see him in Tokyo Tribe, and the whole casting is pretty fresh, pretty fun. You also have the usual trope of Sonosion, so it means you have a lot of charming actresses with quite impressive boobies. You also have quite a few shots of pantyhose. That's a typical Japanese characteristic, I would say, and especially the case of Sonosion from what I've seen so far. It's really, it doesn't try to be really deep or anything. It's just a visual fest, a musical fest also, because the music is actually pretty good, and it really helps to put you into this gang fight universe in this parallel world Tokyo, and that really helps to elevate the film one degree higher. And it's the kind of movie you will like if you are fond of unusual film, if you like films which are not your completely mainstream audience. It doesn't go that crazy, I would say. It's not like some of the most crazy things that Japan or elsewhere in the world can be produced there and there, but it's more like the weird playful vibe. It's not taking itself too seriously. It's just there in order for you to have fun, but at the same time it's creative. It's bringing a lot of idea on the table and on the screen, and so at the end you really have a great time. The only very, very small complaint I could make toward the film is that it may be slightly too long, which is something you can quite often criticize Japanese cinema for. They tend to be a bit longer than they should, but it's really a very small criticism there, and it should not be the source of any problem for you to appreciate and to enjoy the wackiness, but the good wackiness of Tokyo Tribe, of Sonosion's Tokyo Tribe. At number 9, I have Welcome Back Mr. MacDonald by Koki Mitani. Welcome Back Mr. MacDonald is completely different from Tokyo Tribe. It's a comedy. It's a comedy about a radio play which will be aired on a radio live. It's the first time for a new scriptwriter, an amateur scriptwriter, for her to see a script being played like this. And so we are going to witness the preparation of this play and the recording of this play. And what happens is that the star of the show wants to make a change to the script, and she wants her character to be called Mary Jane instead of the original name, which was decided by the scriptwriter. And so this very, very small change, just a name change, is going to create a snowball effect where everybody involved will want to have some change made, that will create some continuity problem, some ego problem, and that will lead to a lot of a very funny situation. And that's really what makes the Welcome Back Mr. MacDonald so great, in my opinion. Is that there is two ways to look at it. The first way is that it's a very good comedy. It knows how to use the starting point to the best effect, so that you have many different reactions, that you can always keep the rhythm with new things happening, and you are never bored watching it, and you have all these interesting characters. That's another thing which is to the credit of the film, is that it managed to make some characters you relate to or you have some interest for. They are interesting enough for you to want to see how they are going to interact with each other and how they are going to deal with the new situation they are given. And it managed to keep this rhythm and this creativity and and to keep things funny all the way from the beginning to the end, and that's really to the credit to Koki Mitani and to the film in general. And so that's the first thing which makes Welcome Back Mr. MacDonald a great film, and a film I really like. It's that it's a very funny comedy, but at the same time it's also a very interesting commentary about artistic creation, and mostly artistic creation when you do it as a group. So may it be a theater play, a stage play, may it be a film, may it be some other activities which require several people involved. And that's very interesting if you like this kind of artistic creation, to see first how everybody is supposed to do what. There is a very clear repartition of the task of what is supposed to do the producer, what is supposed to do this technician, and so you have a better understanding in a way of the way a film, or in this case a radio play, is created. Also how important to have someone who is able to do some sound design, these kind of things. All these kind of things are really shown in a playful but interesting way, and it also shows how difficult it is to be able to keep your artistic vision when you are in such an environment, how many compromises you have to do in order to finally get the thing done. And at the end it may end up being quite different from what you had in mind originally. And so it's a very interesting and very smart commentary about making film, making stage, making plays, making all kind of artistic endeavors, and that's very nicely done from Koki Mitani. Surprisingly, the film is a bit forgotten nowadays. It seems to have been quite appreciated by the Japanese critic back then when it was released in '97, if I remember correctly, and it was also a success, I think. I haven't digged really very deep on that aspect, but I think it worked fairly well at the Japanese box office. But it seems like nowadays it's a little bit forgotten, and so I really want to shed some light on the film and push you to watch it. There is really a good chance, if you are watching those videos, there is a really good chance that you like movies, you like artistic creation, and so there is a good chance you will enjoy Welcome Back Mr. MacDonald, and you will appreciate it for the good comedy that it is, but also for the insightful commentary it is about artistic creation, about making art as a group. At number 8, I've put Harakiri, also known as Seppuku, directed by Masaki Kobayashi. Of course, I had to have Masaki Kobayashi on this video, in this listing, because he is one of the greatest Japanese filmmaker. He did some amazing film, of course this one Harakiri, but there is also Samurai Rebellion, there is also Kwaidan, there is also The Human Condition, which is insane, and so Harakiri is part of this time frame of his career from the end of the 50s until early mid-60s, during which he was really at the top of his game. It's really amazing he was able during these 10 years to keep such a consistency of quality in his work. It's really insane. But what is also noteworthy for Masaki Kobayashi is that Harakiri was one of the very rare cases in his career where he did period films. He is mostly known nowadays as a period film director, as a samurai film director, but that's absolutely not the case. He was mostly a contemporary filmmaker. He was doing mostly drama set in the modern times. And Harakiri, Kwaidan, and Samurai Rebellion are exceptions in his filmography, actually, because they were set during the time of during the older time of Japan, and so that's in the case of Harakiri during the Tokugawa shogun time. So while the time frame chosen for the film for Harakiri is surprising in Kobayashi's career, the themes which are developed in the film are absolutely not surprising. It's completely logical and makes complete sense if you know a little bit about his career. He's someone who was always trying to promote moral and individuality against some kind of oppressive system, and that may be a lot of different kind of system. It makes perfect sense if you know a little bit about his life. Of course, he was drafted in the Japanese Imperial Army, and he took part during the Second World War, and that was a big shock and a big trauma on him. He was kind of a pacifist already, and he didn't want to participate in this war, and that made him extremely critical about this kind of institutions and the mechanism which push people to lose their humanity in favor of this kind of systems. And that's exactly the subject there is in Harakiri, and in this film he directs his analysis, he directs his criticism toward the Bushido Code. You are certainly aware of the Bushido Code, the code which the samurai were supposedly following. I think it's something which needs to be taken with a grain of salt. It's often seen in a very idealized way, a very romanticized way outside of Japan by a lot of people who are interested in Japan or in martial arts. And also in Japan, there are a lot of people who really trust Bushido Code, who thinks it's great values and they need to be respected and they need to be appreciated. I personally, as Kobayashi, I'm much more critical toward the Bushido Code, and I think there is a pretty good dose of exaggeration and idealization, and in some respect, the Bushido Code was also a way to keep some kind of outdated social order and to push people to follow orders blindly in a way for other people who not necessarily were abiding by its code. And that's what we have in Harakiri. We have someone who is going to try to do good and who is going to suffer badly because of that from people who supposedly are following this code, but which are actually enforcing it in its most dehumanizing way. And it's done in a very dramatic way, very powerful way, with great performances. You have Tatsuya Nakadai, the legend Tatsuya Nakadai, who is still alive and still working, even if it seems like finally his age is catching up and he has been much less active those last few years. But this guy is a titan of, I was going to say Japanese cinema, but of cinema in general. He has worked with some of the greatest Japanese filmmakers and some other great filmmakers outside of Japan as well. He's a great actor, obviously, and he's perfect here. He brings this kind of intensity, which is the trademark of his acting style, and he's perfect in the film in Harakiri. And I especially love the direction of Kobayashi in it. It's very almost mathematic, I was going to say, almost scientific. The frame is perfectly composed. You can see that he has really thought about it deeply, and there is no chance, there is no luck, there is no approximation in his direction. The framing is just beautiful each time, and you also have some subtle but very efficient camera moves. It's just brilliant. You find this kind of it's the brilliance of academic direction, a bit like David Lean or this kind of directors. These people who really know what they need to do, and they don't try to do some fancy editing or fancy camera moves. They really go to the point, but with a perfection which is almost out of this world. The film is beautifully shot. It's amazing with a great black and white, the kind of black and white which Japanese cinema was very good at doing back then, as the film was made in 62. So 62, that was still like the golden age of Japanese cinema studio system. They were really doing great film after great films. And Harakiri is part of this golden age, but is even one level higher in my opinion. It's a lot of powerful drama. It's also great for people who wants to think and to put things in questions and to not take the cliche of Japanese culture for granted, and who are ready to think a bit deeper about these kind of issues. It's an amazing film, obviously. And if you appreciate Harakiri and you haven't seen a further film from Masaki Kobayashi, I can only push you to do so. As I say, The Human Condition is also a monument of filmmaking in general, not just Japanese filmmaking, but filmmaking in general. And you should watch it, and you should also watch some of the other films made by Masaki Kobayashi. Some of these contemporary drama, some of them are really good as well. He's an amazing filmmaker who seems to be a bit forgotten nowadays. At least I don't think it's forgotten. The people who like Japanese cinema and who like cinema in general have most likely heard about Masaki Kobayashi. They may have also watched a few of his films, but there is much more to be discovered. I think there is much more to be recognized from Kobayashi, and much more to learn also. And so really I advise you to watch Harakiri and Seppuku and push further your exploration of the filmography of this great Japanese master. At number 7, I have Gamera 2 Attack of Legion. I'm a big fan of the Gamera trilogy by Shusuke Kaneko. I think that's the best kaiju film which have ever been done. I'm much more critical of Godzilla, the Godzilla series comparatively, but you can address actually a similar criticism with a first film which was quite realistic, quite gritty and very well made, and then which evolved more for kids, and then had some kind of rebirth in the 80s for Godzilla and in the 90s for Gamera. But I think the Gamera films are the apex of kaiju cinema in general. Nothing so good has been done since Shusuke Kaneko took care of the atomic turtle. And what is interesting is that he was able to do something a bit more adult compared to what Godzilla has done for the most part. He was also able to create a real mythology, something which made it intriguing, something which made it mysterious, and you wanted to know more about the universe in which Gamera and the different monsters were living, and what kind of entity they were representing each other's. You also had, of course, what you can expect from a great kaiju film, which are fights between monsters, and at the same time distractions of famous landmarks of cities and these kind of things, which are done almost to the perfection, with great special effect, with a great combination of special effects. You have a bit of CGI, you have a bit of practical effect, you have all kind of techniques which were used in order to make the special effects of the Gamera trilogy effective and convincing, and it's really for a great show, a great entertainment. Another factor which helps the Gamera trilogy to be one of the best kaiju series ever, it's the care which has been put also on the characters. There is much more care, and they are a bit more, I won't say they are as developed as in a Kurosawa film or in a Mankiewicz film. We are not at this level of perfection, of course, but still you can see that there have been some care which have been put in order to make them a bit more three-dimensional compared to most of the characters which are into kaiju films, which are usually one-dimensional and who you don't really care much about. In the Gamera trilogy, you really have many opportunities to find those characters interesting, to see them developed enough so that you will want to see their adventure further, and that will help make the kaiju drama also more interesting and more exciting. And why choose the second episode of this trilogy rather than the first or the third? Let's be clear, the first and the third are also great films, and if you watch Gamera, if you want to see Gamera 2, you need to start with Gamera 1, and you need to keep going with Gamera 3. I mean, it's a trilogy and the 3 films are great. But personally, I have a special fondness for this Gamera 2, for the Attack of Legion, and mostly for 2 reasons. First, the first reason is a fairly trivial one. It's not a big thing, but I think it really helps to create a special mood, a special atmosphere. And it's that the film is mostly shot in Hokkaido, the most northern island of Japan, and it's set during winter time, so you have snow everywhere, and that really creates a different mood compared to your average kaiju film. It makes it a bit more depressing in a way, but not in a bad way. That creates a more interesting spleen. It's like the city and the things around are moving a bit more slowly, but that creates an interesting vibe, something which is unusual. That also helps the film to have some kind of originality compared to other kaiju film, and so that helps for me to give a special identity to this Gamera 2. But the main reason for me to enjoy this one especially, it's the main bad guy. It's Legion. I just love the design of this monster, which comes from space in this case. I like the fact that it's not revealed in its entirety right away. We have a bit of scenes with the kind of mini legend, let's call them this way, which are reminiscent of Alien 2 by James Cameron, and that's a good thing in my book. And it managed to make it quite to build up the suspense and to build up the anticipation for the final form of Legion. And once Legion appears in its final stage, in its full glory, it's just amazing. The design is a very inspired blend of sci-fi space monster element, but at the same time also a lot of insectoid characteristics, and it managed to really create it and to have its own individuality. It's not just a generic design which you can see in many monster film, especially in Japan. They have a real culture in creating kaiju, in creating monsters, giant monsters, and they have done some great ones. There are many which are amazing, from Mothra to King Ghidorah and many others. But for me, there is a special place in my heart for Legion, because it's such an original, out of this world creation, and at the same time it looks great on screen. It's just beautiful once he's doing his laser or whatever special abilities that he has. It's beautiful thanks to the special effects from Iguchunski, if I remember correctly, and thanks to the way Shusuke Kaneko also contribute in the choice of the light being used, the choice of the angle to put him at his best, and the choice of the different kind of special effect techniques being used there, with some animatronic, with other tricks there and there, and that has a great result on the screen. And each time Legion appears, he is really illuminating the screen and making the film almost apocalyptic in a way, and so it's just amazing to see him there. And of course, when he's fighting with Gamera itself, he's pretty good. I really love the the design which was made also for this rebirth of Gamera, and especially on this second episode. And so having those two beautiful monsters duck it out, fight, and destroy everything around them, destroy these beautiful landscapes of snowy Hokkaido is just a blast. I really love to see Attack of Legion. As I said, the best kaiju film, the best kaiju trilogy, and Attack of Legion, just a amazing piece of filmmaking from the beginning to the end from Shusuke Kaneko and his team. At number 6 we have the first anime from this list, and it won't be the last. It's My Neighbor Totoro by Hayao Miyazaki. Of course you have to have a Hayao Miyazaki film, or at least a Ghibli film, let's put it this way, on a listing of your favorite Japanese film. I mean, everybody loves Hayao Miyazaki's work, and I'm no exception there. I could have said so many titles. I could have put Mononoke Hime, I could have put Laputa, I could have put many others from his studio. They are all amazing, they are all great. But for this selection I chose My Neighbor Totoro because I think I have a lot of films which are a bit aggressive, which are a bit violent, and so I wanted to bring a bit more peace in this selection with Totoro, which is most likely his cutest film. It's most childish film, I was going to say, in a way, but not in a bad way. The kind of films which make you come back to your childhood, and which makes you want to be back during that time, to have this kind of innocence. It's also a film which is fairly short, which in my opinion is a good thing. Too many times filmmakers are indulging and they make their films longer and longer. That's especially the case nowadays, and that's especially the case in Japanese cinema. There are sometimes issues of tempo and rhythm in Japanese films, but that's certainly not the case in My Neighbor Totoro. A wonderful evocation of childhood, of keeping your mind open and ready to embrace nature in all its facets, and with more fantasy-like style, of course, because that's the spirit of many of the Ghibli Studios films, and of Hayao Miyazaki creation in general, to have this kind of almost animist, very Shintoist in a way style, with those creatures which are so wonderful. I mean, they are beautiful design, and you really want to hug them, you really want to embrace them and be with them. They are like some perfect pets in a way for the Totoro itself, but also some of the other creations in the film. I especially like the cat bus. I think it's a very interesting creation, very creative on many aspects, and just something you want to see by yourself and experience to be in the cat bus and see how things are around when you are in this wonderful transportation mode. If you are into Ghibli's creation, I can not recommend enough checking the Ghibli's museum, which is in the suburb of Tokyo, which is a very small museum. You will have done it in like half a day, maybe even less. But it's really wonderful to see all these things together in this environment, which is very kid-friendly. It's especially good if you have kids. They will really love it. If you're an adult, you will miss some of the things. As in most of my video, there is always this kind of touristic attraction segment, and that's the one for this video. But yeah, My Neighbor Totoro, by one of the greatest filmmaker when it comes to animation, and not just animation, I mean in general in filmmakings, that is Hayao Miyazaki, someone who is not easy to deal with, judging by many people who have worked with him, but result is always beautiful and open your imagination through the constant creativity that Hayao Miyazaki is showing. On My Neighbor Totoro, it's certainly no exception. At number 5, I have another anime, but this one is very different from My Neighbor Totoro, even if it was actually released around the same period as the Hayao Miyazaki's film. So that is Akira by Katsuhiro Otomo. Of course, Akira is a super classic of animation, and Japanese animation especially. It's the alpha and the omega in a way of mature animation, with the violence, the very serious theme, the darkness of it. All these things really reached a new level with Katsuhiro Otomo's creation. The film of his life, even if he has done other things after, and he already did a few things before, mostly as a mangaka and not as an animation film director. But that's clearly like the top of what he has created so far, and as he's not really getting any younger, most likely the top of what he has created in his whole life. Akira, that's a film I discovered when I was a teenager in the early 90s. That was a time in France where we were getting quite familiar with Japanese animation through many cartoons which were shown on TV, things like Dragon Ball, Saint Seiya, Grandizer, and many others. And so we were already quite familiar, and we were already quite addicted in a way to this kind of Japanese animation. But Akira was the next level. It was super impressive to look at. I mean, the technicality of the film is still to this day super impressive. That's a film which was extremely expensive to produce, and they really took extra care in order to make it different from most of the other productions back then. And it's still all the test of time. It's still gorgeous to look at nowadays, and it has the spirit of Katsuhiro Otomo's manga, with the themes about juvenile delinquency, about a revolution, about corruption of a political system, transhumanism in a way also. Many very serious themes, which are maybe not perfectly handled, because we know that the production of the film was complicated, as Katsuhiro Otomo was also still working on the manga at the same time. The manga was halfway, if I remember correctly, when he did the film. So you can see that there are things which he wasn't completely sure where to go with them, but still that makes for a very impressive film, and something which also give you a lot of reflections. I mean, a lot of things to think about. My relationship with the film was kind of evolved with time. The first time I saw it, as I said, I was a teenager, and I was super impressed. But then after I read the manga, and I was kind of disappointed with the film, because the manga was able to develop things much further, and it was also going in other directions with the post-apocalyptic Tokyo, which is described in the second half of the manga, which was quite interesting to me. I also liked some of the characters, the development of the characters, especially of Kei, or some other characters which are much more interesting in the manga, like Lady Miyako, compared to the movie, in which it's like a cameo, and the character is quite different actually from the manga. So I was a bit disappointed by the film, knowing the manga, but now with time I appreciate it more for what it is, and I actually appreciate that it is slightly different from the manga, that it still has, of course, many elements from the comic book, but it still goes in other direction, as I said. And for example, the ending, which is very 2001 Space Odyssey like, was something I was a bit skeptical the first few times I watched it, but now with age I appreciate it much more, and I think I maybe understand it more compared to when I was a teenager. And so now, I mean, I really enjoy the film. I really think it's a masterpiece for Otomo and for Japanese animation in general, and I think I'm not really going against the general consensus on that. I mean, almost anybody who is into animation or who is into Japanese cinema loves Akira, and for good reasons. Really a incredible film, lot of energy as well, and you know that's something I really appreciate. Many charismatic characters. The colonel is someone I was always quite impressed with, for example. But all the characters are really noteworthy. They have their own personality. Of course, Tetsuo is more like the central character rather than Kaneda or Akira. But they are all interesting. They all bring something on the table, and Otomo really pour all his guts and all his obsession in the film, and it really shows. Amazing film from the beginning to the end. Akira, a classic, and for very, very good reasons. At number 4, I've put Hana-bi, also known as Fireworks, directed by Takeshi Kitano. Kitano is someone I've discovered as a filmmaker at the end of the 90s, when he was starting to be recognized by international critics through film festivals, through Sonatine, this kind of films, Kids Returned as well. I was already starting to get interested in cinema, not just as an entertainment, but as something, a media which could bring something more, which could lead to deep feelings, and also to make you think about other stuff. So an emotional side and an intellectual side, and not just entertainment itself. And so I was quite interested by Takeshi Kitano's work, because he was highlighted as one of these brilliant newcomer director, and I discovered Hana-bi in theater. It was released in theater, and it was the first Takeshi Kitano's film I saw in theater, and I was really blown away by the combination of darkness and poetry. That's really what struck me very strongly in Hana-bi. That's these two components which should not be together in a way, but they are there, and Kitano really managed to have them blend in Hana-bi. I think that's probably one of his most personal films. In a way, all his films are personal, but I really felt a stronger connection with Hana-bi compared to some of his other films. I'm not saying that I dislike the other films made by Kitano. Of course, as usual, there are varying degree depending on each films, but I especially like A Scene at the Sea, Kids Return, and a few others. They are my favorite, and they could be on this list instead of Hana-bi, those two I've just said. But Hana-bi remains one of my early shock of discovery of Kitano, and so it has a special place in my heart. And at the same time, as I said, I think it's one of his most personal one, where he's able to put the most of him, the most of his art on the screen, especially as he's acting in the film, compared to the other two I've just mentioned, Kids Return and A Scene at the Sea, which, as I said, are beautiful, great film also, but which do not have Kitano in them, and that's what makes the little difference, what makes Hana-bi a little bit more personal. At least it touches me a little bit more, because there is this Takeshi Kitano, there is Bit Takeshi on the screen, and he's really the one who is the most able to blend in physically these two aspects of him, this violence, suicidal tendencies, and at the same time someone who is able to be very poetic, who is very touched by a landscape or by simple feelings, and so this combination of two is really blend perfectly, as I said, in Hana-bi, and that touched me really dearly, and it still does to this day. It's a movie I don't really watch that often, because it's a bit heavy. That's not the kind of film you will want to watch every year, but still Very powerful film, a film which is very dear to me, and I think probably the very best of Takeshi Kitano so far, even if, as I said, his filmography is always interesting nevertheless. At number 3, I've put another anime, but this will be the very last anime to be on this list, and that's Patlabor 2, directed by Mamoru Oshii. If you follow a little bit this channel, you are probably already aware that I am quite a big fan of Mamoru Oshii. I've made a video on the Kerberos Panzer Corps' most personal universe, the most personal universe he has developed so far, so obviously I am very interested in what he does. If you have watched the follow-up video I did about the Kerberos Panzer Corps universe, I was talking about the movie in live action made by Oshii, and I was actually quite critical about most of them. Only Avalon I found was really a good film. The others were all mixed bag at best, even if they had sometimes some good components, but that was never great. On the other hand, while Oshii is not a great live action filmmaker, he is an amazing animation director, and that's really quite something, because he has done many great films. The Ghost in the Shell series is just insanely good, and they could have been on this video as well, but I have a special soft spot for the Patlabor universe. What I really appreciate in the Patlabor universe is that it tries to deal with the mecha in a very realistic and credible way, and that's always an approach I enjoy, and at the same time being movies which were made after a long and successful series of anime, which were some OAV and a few other mediums. So this universe was already well developed, and so Oshii just had to simply take it and put it on the big screen. Just respect the universe, just keep those characters which are very relatable, which you really like to follow, and then with this starting point he can just develop his own thing, and then he can put his own thinking, his own emotions, and that's exactly what happens with the two Patlabor he directed. The first Patlabor is a great film as well, very Oshii also, in a different way, in a different direction. It's a bit more spiritual in a way, but the one I really enjoy the most is the second. I really love the subjects brought forward by Oshii with Patlabor 2, which are dealing with the notion of peace and war, which are dealing with the notion of terrorism, the notion of loyalty for a government. All these subjects are things I'm really interested about in the first place, and I think the way Oshii is dealing with them is masterful. It's not because they are heavy subject. I mean, that's not something which you can just have a clear answer about how to deal with this kind of issues. It's not black and white, and Oshii managed to keep the grayness of it and at the same time provide some food for thought which you can push further if you want, if you are interested about this subject. If you are interested in this subject, the conversation, the character or the situation which are described will give you a lot of opportunities to enrich your own thinking about them. They will stay with you, and they will be a foundation, or they will be a good way for you to push forward on these kind of issues. So it's intellectually very stimulating, but at the same time the film managed to remain quite entertaining through the different characters from the Patlabor universe, which we have already followed in the previous video, on the previous films, depending on which formats you had already seen before. So in order to appreciate Patlabor 2 the best, I think you better watch the other things which had been done before that, and if you have difficulty to watch the OAV and the other TV series stuff, you may at least watch the very first Patlabor film, because it will be at least an interesting introduction to the characters and to the Patlabor universe. And then you can go further and you can enjoy keeping seeing those characters, keeping exploring this universe with the masterful touch of Oshii in the story, in the script. And two other reasons which make Patlabor 2 one of the very best film in my opinion is number one, the fact that Oshii at the same time also, while make it intellectually stimulating and entertaining, it also brings some kind of poetry to the action with some beautiful moody sequence, especially when there is the coup d'etat in the film, or simile coup d'etat, almost coup d'etat, which happens. Those moments are just beautiful. There is some kind of poetry in this kind of very serious political situation, and that really elevate the film one level further. And another thing which elevate the film one step further, it's the number two reason I was talking about, and that is the soundtrack by Kenji Kawai. I really enjoy in general Kenji Kawai's compositions. I really like what he did on Seven Swords. I really like his other score for Oshii. But yeah, on Patlabor 2 it's maybe a bit more discreet compared to Ghost in the Shell or some of his other works, but it fits really perfectly, and especially during the conversation scenes, or the most moody ones, it really fits perfectly the atmosphere that Oshii was trying to create, and that makes for film brilliance in a way. There is a real state of grace there, and that's just amazing to see, amazing to listen. And so yeah, Patlabor 2, one of my very favorite Japanese films, so of course it has to be at the very top of this listing. At number 2, I was planning to have a Kinji Fukasaku film, because I'm a big Kinji Fukasaku fan. I really love his work, and originally I was thinking to have a Shogun Samurai in there, which is one of my very favorite Kinji Fukasaku's film, but I already mentioned Shogun Samurai when I did the Sonishiba retrospective, so I think I'm going to substitute another film. It's not a problem, because there are many Kinji Fukasaku's films which I love, so there is really no problem to find another which I can talk about and which I love as much as Shogun Samurai. And so in this case, for this listing, I'm going to cheat a little bit and put a series of films which he did, which are the Battle Without Honor and Humanity. Why this series of films? First, because I really like Yakuza films in general. I'm not big on gangster films when it comes to American gangster films or Italian gangster films. Maybe I've seen too many of them when I was young, but I'm not too fond of them, and I think there is always a problem about the morality of this kind of characters. Making these gangsters heroes is always problematic, because that's always one-sided, always a bit simplistic, and I always have a bit of a problem with that. But strangely, I don't have this problem when it comes to Yakuza. I don't know exactly why, but there is something in the Yakuza spirit which I find interesting to watch, and even if I'm not caught into the mystique of these heroic characters, I still think they are gangsters, and they are not something good for society in general. I enjoy to see them in Japanese film. I enjoy to see Yakuza in films, and the way they are shown, because they bring something a bit different, a mystique which is slightly different, and an aesthetic also which I find much more interesting to watch compared to the American Italian mafia or the triads. I find it more interesting when it is Yakuza, and I'm not sure why, but that's how it is. And when it comes to the Yakuza genre in general, there is one subgenre of this genre which I really love. It's the Jitsurogu. So if you are a bit unfamiliar with Yakuza films, there have been different periods, of course, in the Yakuza genre. The most successful was most likely the 60s with the Ninkyo Eiga, so movies which were promoting a very idealized image of Yakuza, really with Yakuza as a hero, someone who really follow a code of honor, with someone always helping the poor and the weak. So really a completely idealized vision of the Yakuza, and they did a lot of them in the 60s. It's really insane the number of films they were able to produce during a span of, I would say, 5-6 years, something like that, because it was indeed extremely popular. And those films can be quite entertaining. I find them fun most of the time, but that's not the subgenre I really prefer. That's the one which follow the Ninkyo Eiga, and that is the Jitsurogu, so movies which are usually based on real stories, on real gangster stories which had been related, which had been talked about in a newspaper. And those films are much more cynical and much more violent compared to the Ninkyo Eiga films. They really show the gangster world for, in my opinion, what it is, which is far from being heroic, with a lot of backstabbing, with a lot of violence, with all this kind of code of honor being used in order to manipulate others. So something very, very cynical. And the master of the Jitsurogu is clearly Kinji Fukasaku. He did a lot of films, more than 10 if I remember correctly, during the 70s, and all of them are great. But the one I love the most, it's the Battle Without Honor and Humanity series, which really has all the basis, all the foundation of the Jitsurogu, once again based on a real gang war which happened after the Second World War during a span of 20 years. That's how the film is, but it's based on real cases which happened indeed around Hiroshima during this 20-year span. And you have all the spirit of Jitsurogu in Battle Without Honor and Humanity, so a lot of a fight during gangs, but also a lot of plotting, a lot of manipulation, a lot of sadness and drama, of course, because you will have some people who believe in some of those values, who want to do a bit more good, but who will all end up with a terrible and tragic fate. And what makes it also interesting, aside from the energy and the spirit that Kinji Fukasaku bring to the table, which really makes the style of the Jitsurogu films, you also have the main character, who is being played by Bunta Sugawara, and who is perfect as this hard-edge Yakuza guy. Bunta Sugawara has never been better than when he's playing this kind of hardcore Yakuza. He's much less convincing, in my opinion, when he's doing other genre like comedy. But when he is in the Jitsurogu, he's the incarnation of the Jitsurogu, basically. That's him. When you think about this subgenre, you think Bunta Sugawara. He is perfect, and he's not, even if he's not the great actor Japan has produced, he is perfect for this style, and he is perfect in the Battle Without Honor and Humanity series. And what is also very interesting with this series is that they have been made very quickly in a short span in order to capitalize on the success of this genre. But surprisingly, they all managed to keep a high degree of quality. I would say they are all great. I would not be able to say, like for many other series, the first is great, but as soon as we have the second, the third, the fourth, the quality decrease, which is what happened most of the time with this kind of film series. But that's not the case on the Battle Without Honor or Humanity series. It's always consistent. The first movie is great, and then all the others are the same level of quality, and that's really insane. And once you start the series, you won't be able to stop. You will want to see all of them, and you will enjoy all of them, because there is this degree of quality which is sustained from the beginning to the end, and that's really super impressive for filmmakers to have been able to achieve that. And that really shows the talent of Kinji Fukasaku and the level he had achieved around that time during the 70s. I think the 70s was probably the greatest time of his career, the one where he was the most creative, and in which he had found that the genre in which he was able to show the best of himself. Even if after that he did some many great films as well, from Battle Royale to Legend of the Eight Samurai. I like this one as well. Triple Cross, to stay in this kind of cops and gangster stories, or Omocha, the Geisha House. Many great films. I mean, he's an amazing director. But the 70s are his era. That's really when he was able to make the strongest mark on the Japanese cinema industry in general. And yeah, those films are the best you can find if you want this kind of realistic Yakuza stories. Even if once again there have been some many good films about Yakuza which have been produced later, but the 70s and the film made by Kinji Fukasaku, this series, but a few others he has done, like Cops vs. Thugs and many others. They are all great, and you should check them if you haven't yet. I don't think you are going to be disappointed. And at number 1, I have another titan of filmmaking, one of the greatest director ever, that is Akira Kurosawa. Akira Kurosawa, that's someone which I discovered when I was starting to be interested in cinema in general, as I said, when I was seeing cinema not just as an entertainment but as something more. And of course I was very impressed and very touched by the corpus of Akira Kurosawa. He is an amazing director, and I love, once again, many of his films, from Kagemusha to Ran to Stray Dog, Rashomon, Seven Samurai, of course. All these films are insanely good. But in this selection I will go in another direction, and I will talk about Redbeard. Redbeard, which is the last collaboration between Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune, and just for that enough it would be a good reason to have in this list, in this top 10 of my favorite Japanese film, because the combination of Kurosawa and Mifune is always sure to generate some sparks, to generate something interesting on the screen, and it doesn't disappoint here. Mifune is just magnificent. He's really capturing the light. He's really able to hit the screen, and so you will always see him there on the screen. You will be captivated by him when he will be on the screen. And at the same time you have a beautiful story which is quite emblematic of Akira Kurosawa's values and the way he was looking at the world, which, despite being quite grumpy, despite having faced some difficult situation in his life, is always looking for something optimistic, is always looking for something which will help you to see the good in humanity in general. And that's not necessarily something which is easy to do every day, but he has managed in some of his most successful films. And Redbeard is certainly one of them. It's full of humanity. It's really showing the bright side of humanity, even in a tough context, even when it's all dark around you, that you should still strive to be a better human being. And that's something which I found very touching when I watched it when I was a teenager, when I was a young adult, let's put it this way, on which I still think should be the motto to follow nowadays. And so if you have difficulty to keep this kind of spirit about the good side of humanity and striving to be a better human being yourself, I think you need to watch Redbeard, or to rewatch it if you have already seen it, because that will be the kind of boost that you need. It will inspire you and it will push you to become better and to remain someone good. And so that's something that not many movies are able to accomplish, and that Akira Kurosawa in general in his film is able to do. And I think he has, even if he has done it very well in other films like Ikiru, for example, but I find it even more powerful in Redbeard. For me, I was going to say the apex of Akira Kurosawa, the masterpiece of Akira Kurosawa, but he has done so many great films. I mean, I could completely say the same thing about Ran. Ran is a masterpiece, even if it's much darker compared to Redbeard, but it's just so beautiful. The way Kurosawa film things, it's just insane. I really love this kind of what people would call academic style of filmmaking, but usually when it's used like this, people like to criticize it. It's implied that being academic is a bad thing, but when it comes to directors like Stanley Kubrick, Akira Kurosawa, David Lean, I don't think that's a problem. I mean, I think that's just beautiful. I think that's actually the best way of making movies you can, with just a perfect framing, with just the right moves in order to create the feelings that they want to generate, and no need to show off, no need to try to do some music video style effect. No, just stick to the character, just be confident in what you have done, in your framing, in your composition, and in the way you move the camera, and that's more than enough. I mean, if you have a talent like the filmmaker I was talking about, that will be more than enough, and that will generate the kind of feelings that you want, and it will open up the brain of the audience so that they can think about the things you have shown. I really think that's a beautiful way to do films, and that's something which I really enjoy much more than the more fancy kind of direction. That's just beauty on the screen, of the purest, the simplest and the purest way, in a way. It's just beautiful. I really love it, and Akira Kurosawa is certainly one of the very great masters of this kind of filmmaking, and that's why he has to be on the number one, on the pole position in this listing. So yeah, Redbeard, if you haven't watched it, go check it. It's a masterpiece, it's beautiful, and it will make you a better human being at the end. That's it, finish for this 10 favorite Japanese films. I will do another country in the next video, and I hope to see you very soon on the House of Asian Cinema. Until then, take care.